Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had with Joe Saward, one of Formula One's most independent and insightful journalists. Joe joined us on the road, somewhere between Paris and Melbourne, rerouted through Dallas to avoid a war zone. With his newsletter already published, his flights changed 3 times, and a flight still hours away. As you'll hear, when the world catches fire, Formula One doesn't stop. It improvises. The question Joe helped us think through is whether improvisation is enough when the sport has 4 races in the middle of it. Before we get to our conversation, though, I need to ask, can you help us out? If this show adds value to your F1 experience, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. Share this episode with other F1 fans. That's how people find us, and it's how we keep growing this community. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, Joe, I'm really glad that despite all the stuff that you're going through, you've been able to find a spot in a lounge at the airport to be able to have a conversation with me. We're hoping that Dick will be able to join as soon as possible, but we're going to continue to go forward, onward and upward. Literally for you, you're going to go upward. We're believing that your plane's going to take off. So I want to get straight to the conversation, and let me set the stage. Before we get into the questions, I want to help our listeners understand that you are joining us as a journalist and as an observer. So someone who has watched this sport navigate crises for nearly 4 decades. You're not here as a spokesperson for F1 management, FIA, or any government. And so what I'm wanting to have is your read on the situation, like what it means, what are some of the questions the sport is asking, and really where the historical record, what it tells us about the sport itself and how it manages all of this. I'm going to weigh in. Dick will hopefully be able to join us and weigh in because as Americans, we may have a different vantage point on some of this than someone like you who's coming from a European perspective. And I think those perspectives matter. And most importantly, I read this morning's JSBM, and I have to say you did not hold back. And I really want to get into that. So I say all that to kind of establish a little bit for our audience and say that, Joe, you've covered this sport through the Gulf War, September 11th. COVID-19, the Houthis firing near Jeddah in 2022. And in your JSBM this morning, you mentioned that teams tend to be flexible and pointed to COVID and the 2010 volcanic eruptions as examples of adaptation. So here's the thing. I want to push back on that framing a little bit because I'm sure that those are great parallels. COVID and the volcano were logistical disruptions, that's for sure, but were not at their root political or involving armed conflict between states. Isn't this closer or even categorically to what a disruptive action World War II was to the sport, but maybe not to that scale? I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, World War II was a bit more cataclysmic, and literally the sport stopped overnight. There was a Grand Prix going on the weekend that war broke out in Belgrade, I believe, and I think it still took place, if I remember correctly. But 1 or 2 of the Germans went home before it happened. But um, in my 40 years, I mean, I was flying over the Gulf the night before Gulf War broke out. I was on my way to God knows where, but I was on my way. And but politically speaking, Formula One just goes where we have to go, and we don't go. So, for example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, um, Formula One said, "No, we're not going there anymore." Done. The contract was terminated instantly. It's an interesting parallel. They invaded another country, they attacked another country. Formula One said, "No, we're not accepting this." Now, I'm not suggesting necessarily that Formula One should say we shouldn't go to America anymore, but there is a question in there, which is what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Because that's true in pretty much every race that we have to go to. There's a whole bunch of people in the West who say Saudi Arabia is a bad place. Is it? Is it any worse than China? Is it any worse than other places? And whichever. How do you do? is it our job to define what is right and what is wrong? And the answer is no, it's not. We're sport. We are entertainment. We are, we're trying to make people happy. So we shouldn't sit there judging anybody. I mean, there's a limit, obviously. I wouldn't be very happy if Stefano said we're off to North Korea, for example. But I think that countries need to be aware of the fact that they have to behave in a sensible fashion, which is, it does raise questions about what is right and what is wrong, because you cannot, without being hypocritical, condemn Russia on the one hand and not condemn America on the other. Now, I'm not saying America as America. I'm talking about a war that hasn't got, as far as I know, and I've been on a flight for a while, so I don't know, but as far as I know, there hasn't been any congressional approval of this war going on at the moment. So all I'm trying to do is ask questions which are sensible questions that need to be asked. I'm not saying this should happen. I'm just saying we should ask questions. And we should ask questions when we go to Saudi Arabia too, for sure. But, what do you judge it on? Do you judge it on the fact they execute people? So do the Chinese, so do the Americans. How do you create a framework? And it's tough. It's really difficult. I know that Stefano and his people are, this weekend, since Saturday, they've been incredibly busy trying to figure out what the hell we're going to do. Not just about the logistics of getting to Australia, but about a month from now, we're supposed to be in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And, if missiles are raining down on these places, should we be there? Interesting point. To be honest, I was in Jeddah when they fired that missile, and I wasn't in the least bit bothered, because I have to say I was impressed. I was impressed by the Houthis, because they stuck a missile into a place that didn't damage anything to do with Formula One. It was about 5 kilometers from the circuit. It created a very big cloud of smoke and oil smoke. And it got all the headlines around the world, but there was absolutely no danger involved. But they weren't aiming for us. And they did a good, again, it's a difficult one to say without upsetting people, but professional terrorism, when it's done professionally and thought through, is impressive if they're good. The trouble is there aren't enough good terrorists, if you see what I mean. There's enough good terrorists in the world. But some of them are very clever, and I thought the Houthis were brilliant because they thought it through. They hit somewhere that got all the newspapers going, got the pictures they wanted, got the story out, and then genius was the following day they declared a ceasefire. And that was really, and again, in inverted commas, good terrorism. It was just very well thought out and very clever. And in a way, not that I condone any of this stuff, but I appreciate professional terrorism, if you like. I know that might upset some people, but what I'm saying is that it's not just a bunch of crazies with a gun, It's people thinking things through. They're trying to get international coverage, and they did it brilliant. And nobody in Formula One was in any danger at any point. Now, on this particular issue here, obviously you can't go flying. All the flights into and out of the Gulf are screwed up. So I was supposed to fly to Doha today. I don't even know what day it is, to be honest, but I think it's today. And the minute, literally on Saturday, when I heard that the attacks had begun, I just canceled my flight and booked to go via Dallas. So here I am in Dallas, everything was working fine until the plane I'm supposed to take to Australia broke down. So it's just been a little bit stressful, but it's it's what we do. Our job is to go and do stuff, get things done, go to places, which is why I use the example of 2010 and the volcano, because it's just magnificent. It's magnificently insane, the things that people did to get home from China. We were all in China, and how we all got home from China. I mean, journeys went both ways around the world. There were people who ended up in Lebanon. There were people who ended up in Canada, trying to find their way home. I ended up in. I was one of the first to get back to Europe. Pure fluke, I've got to add. But I was having lunch on the Tuesday outside, not far from my house in France. And it's just a matter of you do what you have to do. And I've had messages in the last 24 hours. One of my colleagues, who's a photographer who lives in Denmark, is flying by way of Finland, I think. But everyone just everyone just does what they have to do. But that's what Formula One's brilliant at. It is just improvisation, and actually, to sum it up, it's just getting the job done. And I'll bet you there is no problem in Australia this weekend, because the cars are already there, the people will be there. There might be a few people missing, but they're not the important people. Or the important people will find a way of getting them. Now, after that, we go to China. That's easy. We don't have to fly anywhere near the Middle East. The problem comes going home from China, and then afterwards back out to Japan. Then after that, then we have the problem of Bahrain and Saudi. And if the war is still going on, we have a problem. So we'll see. But I'm sure they're already looking at alternative venues. If we can't have races in Bahrain and Saudi, Formula One will be looking at going to Portugal or going to Turkey or wherever they can put on a race to make sure the 24 races are still there. Because at the end of the day, 24 races is what brings in the money.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And if anything, I would say from a policy standpoint, going back to your point about the Russia-Ukraine aspect and how does that, if anything, guide our assessments of what's going on right now, I would say that the sports governance framework, it wasn't really designed to handle situations like this. That's not what its focus is. It's about the sport itself. And then it's when you have geopolitical actors and commercial partners, all that being from the same country, it's a structural problem regardless of who the actual actor is. They just have to deal with it, I would assume. Go ahead.
Well, that's true. But what tends to happen is the FIA, which is supposed to be the governing body of the sport, generally doesn't make decisions in a hurry, because for whatever reason, one, it's fairly amateur in the way it's run, and it takes forever for them to have a committee meeting to decide to do stuff. Whereas the commercial side of it, the Formula One group, Liberty Media, they just say, right, we're doing this, we're doing that, and they get it done. And the FIA generally follows what they're told to do effectively. But ultimately, at the end of the day, everything runs on money. Now, having fancy governance, the FIA has let Russia back into the federation, for example, which I think is wrong. But they're not supposed to have any. I mean, they have a bunch of statutes, but the statutes are so vague they can use them for whatever they want to do. So it's basically a load of old waffle, which can be applied if they want to apply it or not. So decisions are made on where the money is, and and that's actually not a stupid way of doing it, because at the end of the day, the FIA, if they don't get the money from Formula One, they go out of business, because they are massively dependent on Formula One money. The other championships don't make any money. So, or not any huge amount. And Dick's joining us. But the point is that I think the percentage depends on who you talk to. But the percentage of money that the FIA gets from Formula One is something like 75, 80% of their revenue. So if one day Formula One says, we really don't need the FIA anymore, that can stop. And sometimes I think it should stop because the FIA does silly things. But, right now, it's not stopping because fundamentally Liberty Media doesn't want the hassle of having to do all the administrative stuff. And so lets the FIA do that and pays them money. But if the FIA pushes too hard on the finance side of it, in other words, trying to get way more money, they're going to lose because Liberty Media will walk away, and just as NASCAR and other people, they do their own. Effectively, they administer themselves, or the NFL, or the NBA, or the MLB. Can't remember them all, but basically they administer themselves and they are commercially in charge. And that's the danger for the FIA if Formula One says, we don't need them. And it's in football, it's the same thing. Football as opposed to American football. Soccer, you guys call it, but it's football to the rest of the world. The Premier League in Britain came along and said, we want to do this ourselves. And the Football Association, the FA, who previously had run everything, had to go, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. Everything you say, sir, we'll salute. We'll put our name to it. Otherwise, we'll go out of business. And so money talks. And also, the expression always follow the money out, which I think is from The Godfather, or I don't know where. Actually, no, it might come from Watergate, but whatever it comes from, follow the money is very good advice because the money dictates what happens. Hello, Dave.
Hello there, and I am so sorry. I totally spaced and got busy and totally ignored my phone. Typical dumbass me. So anyway, sorry.
That's fine. I mean, we're probably, I don't know where we all are, and geographically, we're all within about an hour, I would think. But I'm on the wrong side of the border.
Yeah. True. I mean, Joe, I literally am 20 minutes north of you. When you leave, you'll probably fly right over my house. So
I probably will. I shall look out the window and wave.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where I'll be waving, but I'll do it anyway.
That's right. Okay. What time do you leave? What time is your flight supposed to depart?
I got 3 hours yet. So.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I've changed all my flights since our last conversation. I mean, I literally, I was just saying to Sabrina, we just do what we have to do. So
yeah,
I've changed the flight so many times in the last 48 hours. I honestly don't know where. I barely know where I am, let alone what day it is.
I understand.
And
so where are you going? I mean, are you direct to Australia then from here or what?
Well, the flight was cancelled. I was going direct to Melbourne. Now I'm going to Sydney. We'll change planes in Sydney and get to Melbourne. And I'll get there about 4 hours later than I should have done if I'd gone through the Middle East, through Doha, which I can't. Obviously, because they're still.
Right.
But actually, I have no idea what's happening in the Middle East. So I've been on a plane for the best part of 12 hours. Oh, so actually more than that. But to be honest, again, I don't know how long I was on the plane for because I don't care. You get on the plane, you change your clock for wherever you're going, and then you don't count because if you count, you get jet lag.
Yep.
Yeah. Jet lag is entirely. This is good advice for everybody, by the way. Jet lag is entirely self-induced. If you want to have jet lag, you can have it. If you don't want jet lag, there are ways of avoiding it. It's all in your own head.
I'll do that.
And it's also about, fatigue when you're flying. This is really good advice for people who don't fly a lot. If you think, oh, it's terrible, I'm going to be in this airplane for X amount of time. It doesn't matter. Get on a plane, 6 hours, 12 hours. What's the difference?
Mm.
I was watching the F1 movie, which I've seen a couple of times already. I've already watched four movies on this flight so far. If you ask me the titles of them, I couldn't tell you whether I did. Doesn't matter whether they were good or not. It just used up the time, and it's all in your head. If you want to be tired at the end of it, you can be tired. But if you try to go to sleep when you're supposed to go to sleep, if you try to eat when you're supposed to eat, it's all fine. You get off the plane at the other end. I will get off, I think, at sort of midday in Australia. And I will be already on Australian midday time.
Yeah.
And I think it's Wednesday. Well, this is, it does get complicated when it comes to days, but I think I get there Wednesday, and I shall go out to a party on Wednesday night, which I happen to know is at. And it won't be it's not a wild party, but I'll meet a bunch of Formula One people and have a chat. So, catch up with what's going on and try and solve some of the other problems that exist in the world.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
I tell you what, I reckon if you put, rather than wasting time with politicians, if you put Formula One team principles on the problem of solving the world's problems, they'd get it done much faster than any of these politicians.
As long as they don't have to be reelected.
No, I honestly believe that, because these are people who solve problems, and the engineers particularly. I mean, some of the engineers are just geniuses. They're brilliant. It's just like, what's the problem? How do we solve it? I can do that. No problem. Boom, done. And you've got to have 27 committee meetings to do anything in politics.
Right.
But for Formula One, you don't have committees. It's just sort of, we do it, done, boom.
Yeah. Next problem.
And it's efficiency, Oh, sorry, I have a very loud cleaning lady going by. I am in the lounge in Dallas.
There you go.
She has flaming red hair, which isn't natural, by the way. There you are. But it's not red hair. It's scarlet.
Scarlet, right? Exactly.
Anyway, go on. Change the subject before I get into trouble. Yeah.
Okay, I'll change the subject now and get us back into some of the other questions related to, especially the things that you put in the JSBM newsletter this morning. So what I heard you say before Dick came and took us in that little tangent was that essentially we have FOM, FIA. FIA tends to be very slow in responding to these things. FOM, because it not only has the money on the line, but we could even argue has its credibility on the line. It has its people out there. All of that, they have to make and adapt quickly and make efficiency a priority. I guess one of the questions I wanted to know was what about the race promoters or the entities that are really supporting the actual execution of the race, in addition, or even teams? Have you ever seen like a team make a decision that even went ahead of something that the FOM would do, or a commercial rights holder in previous eras?
No, I've seen, across the board, everybody in Formula One gets things done. That's the key point. Now, we had French Grand Prix. The French love to go on strike. And we've had strikes in France where all the roads were blocked by trucks. And guess what? All the Formula One teams managed to get through. All the journalists got through. If the road is blocked ahead, you don't sit on the road and wait for it to clear. You go find another road that gets you through. It's just, it's a mentality thing. The FIA is much more amateur in the way it does business. because it is fundamentally it's a bunch of associations. It's I don't know, how do you describe it? It's sort of like the wine committee at the golf club. You know, they're blokes. They're blokes who wear blazers, and that gives them a level of importance in their own communities. And then they've founded an international federation, which happens to have some power uh, because they got there before everybody else did. Originally with aristocrat, and we're talking 120 years ago, and that these powers came into existence. It's not very modern. It's not very efficient. And to be honest, the way it's run is often pretty poor. Now, is it a good idea? Yes, it is a good idea. Can it be better run? Of course, it can be better run. But there are good people who work at the FIA. A lot of good people, and then you have the people who are just there because they're sort of preening themselves. And they're on some kind of ego trip, and so you have to balance. It's true of any sporting federation. Sporting federations are like countries, or they think of themselves as countries in their own right. They think of themselves as being powerful. The IOC, FIFA, all these organizations. They're not that important, but they are important because they're allowed to be. But all of them tend to answer to the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, because that's the one that's really got some cred. But if they all went away tomorrow, there'd be an organization, a professional organization, that would take over most of what they do, and it wouldn't hurt at all. So, in a way, it's sort of toleration. People tolerate the systems that have existed because that's how it is, and it's difficult and painful and a pain in the neck to fix it. For example, when it comes to Grand Prix, licensing of circuits, licensing of officials, all this stuff is what the FIA does. But it could be done by somebody else. But to create that situation, it's just a lot of time, a lot of effort, and in the end, maybe it's better to get rid of them. But sometimes it's just easier not to. And this is something I think we'll face up to in the years ahead. I think there will be a point if the FIA continues to push to take more money out of the sport, to get more power, to try and break the 100-year commercial agreement. All these things, there are signs of all this happening. It's very silly to do that, because if F1 says we're going alone, the FIA dies tomorrow. Literally, it would die, because if they stop getting the money, they can't have their parties, they can't have their committees, they can't have their conventions in bizarre places in the world. They can't have their prize givings in this year. I think it's in Shanghai. Last year it was in Uzbekistan. Which is just it's all about the president, giving some clubs some power and recognition to make them feel good, and they get the votes. He gets the votes he wants by where he doles out his influence. Is that good for anybody? It's good for him. Is it good for them? Not really, but they all agree to do it because that's patronage. That's the system. Is it better to have it run professionally? Yes, it is. So we have to find a way. And under Jean Todt, when he was FIA president, everything ran quite efficiently. He didn't need to be the front man. He didn't need to be in the news. He didn't need to be in the spotlight. He didn't need to feel powerful. He'd done everything you can do in motor racing, and he did a very good job. And his predecessors, Jean-Marie Balestre, way back when I was a young journalist, I battled with him for years. He was an SS officer, and I have, actually he wasn't even an officer. He was an SS sergeant, but I've got photographs of him in SS uniform.
Really?
Oh yeah, Yeah.
I had no idea. I mean, it kind of makes sense given his behavior, but
Yeah, his behavior was bizarre, but he was trying to offset and he was young when, let's face it, in the 1940s, you're 20 years old, 25 years old, whatever. You have not a great big view of the world, and the country that you live in is invaded by Nazis. Do you go with them or do you go with the opposition? The answer is, for a certain period of time, you go with them. So you dress up in their uniform, you get all the passes, you do the stuff, and then suddenly you're on the wrong side politically. And then so he spent the rest of his life trying to make up stories about how he hadn't really been on the wrong side and how he'd always been in the resistance, which is all just a load of tosh, absolute rubbish. But that was the way that was his motivation, and that's the problem with the FIA. The FIA, there's no money in. If you become FIA president, you don't get paid. So people who get that job are people who have a need for power, and they're not necessarily good enough to get power in politics. Max Mosley is a very good example, who was the next president after Balestre. His father was Sir Oswald Mosley, who was a British version of the Nazi. So Max could never be in real politics because his father would screwed everything for him. So basically, he went to motor racing because he could be a politician in motor racing and have some power, because he could not exercise power in the real world. And, we should get rid of the fact that we don't need people who are on power trips running the sport. And that's what the FIA presidency is. It's a power trip. It's a sort of, look at me, I'm wonderful, I'll beat my chest, I'll wear a blazer. It's the same with FIFA, it's the same with all of them. It's just about, I'm powerful and you're not. Da-di-da-di-da. It is. That's exactly what it boils down to. But they're just, they're only powerful because they're not good enough to make it in the big world, or they can't make it in the big world. Max Mosley could have been a prime minister, I reckon, in terms of his intellect. He was brilliant, but he couldn't do it because his father had been a Nazi. And, that's not fair in a way. But, Max screwed up by other things as well. But, but but these are everybody who wants, anyone who wants that job is kind of flawed. Why would you want that job? You don't get paid. You get a bunch of grief. You have to work. It depends who you hire, but you have to work quite hard. But why would you want the job? And I had a massive fight with Jean Todt when he took the job. I said, "Why do you want to be FIA president?" And we didn't get on before. And so we had this big fight, and at the end of it, we sort of shouted at each other for a while, and abused each other a lot. And I said, "Well, just tell me, why do you want to do this?" And it was genius. He turned to me and he said, "Look, I'm not like all the others. I've done everything I can do in motor racing. And if you think about it, you can't argue with him. He won the World Rally Championship with Peugeot. He won the World Endurance Championship. He won Le Mans with Peugeot. He won the World Championship in Ferrari, Formula One, 6 or 7 times. He had nothing that he could do after that. And so he thought, there are 2 things. He thought, I'll become president of the FIA, and I will use that to have a platform to do stuff at the United Nations. So he got to play with United Nations kind of politicians. And that's it, really. But I think the FIA is an anachronism. And if they don't wake up to the fact that they are an anachronism and change the way they do business, I think they will be gone from the sport by 2030. That's my my sense of it anyway. Because at the end of the day, they're just leeching off the money.
Wow. But so, I mean, you make a really valid point about like circuit safety. Oh, I mean, yeah. What do you do about that? I mean, I realize there's circuit designers and all that who could have, I guess, a secondary business where they inspect circuits and decide, is this good enough for Formula One or is it good enough for Formula 3? Whatever.
But that can be done. That can be done by if Formula One says to a bunch of serious people, circuit designers, make us circuits that are safe. What's the difference? At the end of the day, give us officials who are good. You can, Tim Mayer, who tried to stand against for the FIA presidency, wasn't allowed to because of election rules that are highly dubious. He's organized racing series for years. He's been a steward. He's been a race promoter. He's organized pretty much everything you can organize. He knows all that stuff. If Tim was to set up an organization on his own called whatever, Motor Racing Safety Inc., there's no reason if Liberty Media wanted to go, there are reasons, there are arguments about the FIA and what its credibility is. But why would who gives a federation power? If they're recognized by the United Nations, yeah, maybe, but the United Nations ain't what it used to be, which is something to do with you lot at the moment. But it is, who dictates who should have the power? The European Commission, there were some massive fights in the law between the European Commission and Formula One 25 years ago over who should run what and why. And one of the things that concluded is that Formula One would deal with the commercial matters and the FIA would deal with administrative matters and being a governing body. And now they're trying to sort of blur those distinctions. It's a really bad idea because the European Union will wake up to the fact they know what was agreed 20 years ago, and why change it? It's worked well for 25 years. It's 25 years now. It's worked well for 25 years. Why change it? There is absolutely no argument why a bunch of blokes in blazers would do a better job than a bunch of professional people. And so, you can say, yes, they're recognized by this or recognized by that. But why should they be? There's no reason they should be, unless they do a good job. I kind of think the FIA is a good idea if it's being run well and sensibly and in a democratic and transparent, all the things you need to have a modern international organization. If you don't do it by those rules, why the hell should you have any power? You shouldn't. And that power should be taken away. And it will be if they do it. It's just the way the world is. I mean, okay, the world's a little bit bizarre recently because some of the things that we believe to be, the way things were, the structures of the old world, if you like, have been questioned by actions of. Let's not go into politics, but you know what I'm saying. But we have to figure out exactly how the sport operates in a modern world, and we have to find the best way of doing it. And I'm not sure that the current system is the best way of doing it. That's all. And maybe it is. Maybe it is under a different management, under different mindsets. Maybe it would be better. But I don't think with the situations we have at the moment that it's a good thing. But I think fundamentally the idea of an independent sporting authority is a good idea, but only if it's done well.
And that would be the case for anything, right? That last thing, only if it's done well.
That's my view, anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that may not be popular with some people, but I'm just being entirely rational and objective, and just take the ego out of it, take the pomposity out of it. Just do the job and shut up, you know. And that, and they can do good things. They can do good things with the money that they get. They can do good things, but not trying to make it something it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I know that as I'm listening to you and you described kind of the way the function of the FIA seems to be, it made me think of, I don't know if you have this in the UK because I haven't paid attention in a while, to whether or not this entity that we have here more in the US has come over to your side of the globe. But we have things called homeowners associations. Do you have that?
I honestly don't know, but
I don't remember if it's really moved into the European context, because I know you're in France. But the reason I bring that up is you talk about people with power, but they're not really elected to it. The joke, especially for those of us who were in politics. Well, no, I'm saying is like
elected.
yes, well, but not in a traditional sense of that's where I was trying to go to is for those of us who were in politics, you would kind of joke that if you had a political candidate and they're successful, they're not running for the homeowners association, which is the people who are going to write a ticket if your paint color is incorrect for whatever the agreement is for the neighborhood, or your grass has been 1 inch too tall, and they've gotten this small little fiefdom of power, and they feel the need to control and make sure everyone knows that they are in control. And it initially was intended, I think, for a very good purpose, which was for those who were living together to have some common agreement as to what their neighborhood and their community should be like. But over time, you've started to see some really bizarre stipulations put into agreements, odd agendas that are being pushed by people who are in the leadership or authority role. And it has also created a major backlash against that of people looking to purchase in places where there is no HOA and that they could just have more of a communal conversation with their neighbors versus feeling like it has to all be adjudicated by some very clear infrastructure. So as I heard you, it made me think like this idea of being a little bit more loose, but with guidelines and common agreement versus an enforcer who may or may not, or enforcement and infrastructure that may or may not always operate with transparency and all the other elements that you talked about. I can see why at the scale it's a hard thing.
It's just being sensible, really, and not playing game. And people, particularly rich people, who because these are the people who stand for these kind of organizations. If there's no salary, you can't afford to do it if you're a normal person. So you get rich people, entitled people, annoying people, whatever you want to, you get these people who, and this is why I compare it to a sort of wine committee of the golf club. And they're people who haven't got anything else to do with their time. And they're not necessarily the right people to do it because there are all these hang-ups and all these power kicks and all these other things that nobody needs. You're just running a sport. And that's why I like what Jean Todt did, because he didn't do it badly. When he had to intervene, he did. He did it pretty fairly. I can't think of any occasions. No, I can't think of any occasions when he stepped out of line. And I think the two people before him both stepped out of line for various reasons. Let's not go and more modern than that because I could get into trouble. But I should not get into trouble for pointing these things out. I should not, because all I'm doing is trying to protect the sport.
Censorship is alive and well pretty much anywhere.
Well, censorship is alive and well if we let it be, yes.
Well, okay, fair. Yeah.
So I want to go back a little bit and talk about the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, specifically looking a little bit about the financial aspect of this. So they both are hundreds of millions in dollars in hosting fees, broadcast rights, sponsorship activation. Do you know if F1 carries some type of geopolitical cancellation insurance? Is there a force majeure provision in those hosting contracts that would really cleanly apply to armed conflict? The reason I ask is that, of course, COVID forced everyone to uncharted territory. I'm just wondering what's like the legal framework. Is it any clearer now as a result of that, or is it just it's also another muddled situation that they're going to have to walk through?
It's probably, to be honest, I've never asked that question, but I think it's probably,
Leave it to the lawyer to ask that question.
well,
Of course.
yeah, exactly, yeah. These things are muddled generally, but what happened in COVID is that when races couldn't happen, they just added another year or sometimes 2 years to the contract and just said, we'll delay it until you're ready to do it, until you can do it again. And in the meantime, we'll find other places that can do it right now so that we can have the necessary 24 races that we need for all the sponsorship deals, etc. So if, a month from now, more than a month from now, Bahrain can't hold a race because missiles are still falling on it, which incidentally was quite illuminating the other day because I was watching the TV and watched where the missiles were falling, and my hotel's just around the corner from there, with the place I normally stay. So it's like sort of, okay, yeah, I can see why. But we went to Bahrain, during the Arab Spring, and that was an interesting experience too. But I don't think that the international coverage that happened from Bahrain was fair at all, because as often happens when you're there on the ground and you see the international reporting, it's not the same. When you're there on the ground, and there was it's a journalistic logic here. But if there is a flood, for example, let's get away from specifics, but if there is a flood, which bit do you film? You film the deepest water. You don't film what's really going on the streets. You film the deepest water. You film if something's on fire, you look for the biggest flames. So everything is exaggerated. Not necessarily because you're setting out to do that, just because that's what happens. And I very much found that in Bahrain. I thought way back, which was 2012, something like that, there was not enough sensible reporting going on. Now, in part, that was because I think they were so fed up with international reporters coming in and not reporting the truth that they actually appreciated the fewer sports reporters coming in and going, well, actually, it's not quite like that, And of course, the international news organizations went, what are you guys doing? You can't say stuff like this. The story is this. And you go, well, it's actually not the story, no. I know people who were told by news organizations they work for, tell us the story. Tell us the story they want to hear, not the story of what it really is. And I mean, there are some very funny examples of that, which is, sports journalists going to Bahrain in 2012 and their editors telling them, go find out what the trouble is, And they don't know. They're not political reporters. So they literally ring up the opposition and say, where's the action tonight? And the opposition would go, where would you like it? And it was literally like that, And they came back with rubber bullets, and and they thought they were heroes. They'd been on the front line, But in fact, they were just being manipulated.
Yeah, so that actually leads me to another question. Both Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, and I would even argue some the other countries as well in the region, have spent billions positioning these events, these Grand Prix, as statements of national modernity and stability. Now they've got these missiles hitting their countries. It's almost a direct counter narrative, especially if, as you just said, people are going in with with an intentional message, direction. Do you think that these, governments it will respond by pushing anyway as a show of resilience or accepting a cancellation if it has to? And between the 2 countries, do you think there's even going to be a meaningful difference in how they would approach that calculation? They're very different countries.
They are and they're not, because the regional power of Saudi Arabia is massive. But at the same time, if they are, um, if they say we want to have a Grand Prix and missiles are raining down, Formula One will say no because they cannot go to places where people are under threat. And people won't go. If you looked at what happened in Jeddah when the missile attack happened, although it was a way away from the circuit, a lot of people were spooked. There were TV crews who flew home because the companies felt it was a danger to have the press there. There was no danger. There really was no danger. But that's what people think, and if they're allowed to think that, people get carried away with stuff. So now, if Saudi said, okay, or if Bahrain said, okay, we're going to have a Grand Prix, and the missiles were falling, and there was an imminent threat, a real threat of Formula One people being killed, Stefano Domenicali on Liberty Media would say, no, I absolutely believe that because they are, although they're there to make money, there are things they need to avoid. And one of them is people getting killed, you know. So, even when we were in Bahrain in 2011, 12, whenever it wasn't a real threat. There were newspaper reports about, a team bus might drive past somewhere where there'd been a petrol bombing a little while earlier. Nobody was attacked. We get attacked more in Brazil than we did in Bahrain, you know? And that's for entirely different reasons. They want the watches. And rule number one, if you go to these countries, don't wear fancy watches. It's just silly. Don't flaunt money in a poor country. It's asking for trouble, you know. So I think that Formula One is actually a very responsible organization. And I think that we should listen to what they say because they think it's true. And if they think that it's not right to go into it, it's not just about being on the ground. It's also logistically, you've got to get everything there. And if the planes can't land, you can't get everything there. You can land it somewhere else and drive it across country. And Formula One might do that because they're, as I said before, whatever it takes. But fundamentally, I do not believe that they would put anybody into a dangerous situation. So we don't know where it's going to go. It's way too early to say that. But because of logistics, we have to think about that stuff in advance. And I know that Stefano and his people are already working on that. What do we do if? And that's where we're at now. But honestly, you can't say any more than that because it's too early and we don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I asked that largely because I think that, especially when we're talking about it, looking as you are from the industry, the way that you're looking at it may look very different from a fan perspective because a fan's calculation is it safe for me to go? And especially in the case of if this is their one time that they're going to go to a race, maybe for a year or for 2 years, and then all of a sudden what seems to be a calamity and unsafe conditions, their risk assessment might be different, but to be able to kind of explore how the sport, not just simply because of the commercial needs, but realizing the much larger risk that they have to evaluate would probably, I would hope, would give people more confidence in saying that the sport is seeking to make sure that if anybody is coming, they can feel that there's been some due diligence done to make sure that they're not going to put themselves, let alone their staff and their teams, into a position where it would be very tragic. Because I mean, that would be terrible for the brand, either as the sport or the teams. And so then if you're trying to decide, of course, you still have to make your own decision, but not to simply be inflamed by looking at a media narrative that may or may not be giving you the full picture. So that's why I wanted to kind of unpack some of this that might have seemed very elementary, but I think that it's important to kind of dig deeper in so that way you're doing that critical analysis. The final question on this part, I would say, is do teams carry their own event cancellation insurance, or are they largely relying on what FOM has negotiated at the commercial level? Do you know that? Have you ever asked that question?
I think basically they do what they're told to do, and they're contracted to do that, but they trust the FIA not to do to take them into places of danger. Sorry, not the FIA, FOM. I mean, in some respects, the FIA is not really a player in all this. It could be, but they don't have any commercial power. So therefore, you know, it's, as I said before, it's money that dictates everything. So, which is not necessarily wrong, so long as it's responsible.
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean, it makes sense that, I mean, these entities, I mean, people like to talk about like the cost cap and the prize money, but this would seem to be just another part of the conversation that you would need to have between teams, race promoters, the commercial rights holder, and then you would bring in the governing body as needed and or their responsiveness. Like, again, if you're trying to build consensus, and it sounds like there is a attempt at collaboration and a resilience and adaptability mindset, especially on the commercial side. And that's probably motivated by the fact that you've got millions of dollars and you've got people on the line, and you've got to keep figuring out how to answer the problem. And that's baked into the fact that the sport's approach to things is finding answers, like finding an answer to how to design a car that is going to be the fastest, that is going to bring in that type of people. And so this is just a pour over of that in how they approach business mentality. So yeah, I think it's very interesting.
Absolutely. That sums it up very well. It's just, the risk assessment. And we trust, all of us, goes for the journalists as well. We trust F1 to make the right decisions. And you know what? Every single place that I've been in my 40-year career, I've never, ever felt, I felt worried in places where there was a bit of crime. But you can't solve that. I was decidedly edgy when we went to South Africa in the 90s, when that was going through the transition to democracy. It was not a warm and happy place. But if you were sensible, you didn't get into trouble. Crime in Brazil, crime in Mexico. But I've never felt anywhere where I was, under threat. Even in Bahrain, in those period, or that period of time, I've never felt anywhere where I felt it was irresponsible to be there. And I think that's right. That's how it should be. And I think that they are the ones who should decide, because if we leave it to the media, not a good idea, because you get people exaggerating. If you leave it to the fans don't know. But as a fan, if you go to a place and you've heard stories about this is wrong, that's wrong, almost always you find that it's not nearly as bad as you read about it in the papers. So it's just a matter of being sensible and thinking moderately about things and making sure that everything runs accordingly. And there is no danger to anybody. And I think they do a very good job with that, to be honest. And, okay, so logistically, what we're doing right now is just get there by any means possible. But nobody's crazy enough to fly a freighter through the Middle East at the moment without sort of getting parents people to do it. It's just a matter of, okay, how do we get the cars from Japan in whatever it is? It's 3 weeks time. The cars would have to leave Japan to go to Bahrain. Is that safe? The freighters that take all the equipment, is that safe? End of story. And the answer is we probably can't make that decision for a couple of weeks because we don't know. And we can only guess. And I think in the newsletter I said something about if there aren't going to be any boots on the ground, it's just going to be a question of throwing missiles at each other until one side or the other side runs out of missile. And then so that could last for a month. And if that's the case, we shouldn't go. And we won't. What we do instead, I don't know. It probably would mean, because you can't organize stuff quickly in the short term, it would probably mean that later in the year, we'd have to do more races. But, you look at COVID. And if you look at what happened in COVID, NASCAR had races in the midweek, which is not a bad idea, actually. But Formula One is to put on a Formula One show each weekend is quite a bit. I think it's a bit bigger than having a NASCAR race in terms of organization. So, we'd have to find ways of doing it. But they will want to have their 24 races, quite rightly, because that's what all these contracts exist. And they need to fulfill the contracts, but in a safe and responsible manner.
Well, it's kind of like when we had the flooding in Imola. The race had to be canceled, and the sport adjusted. And I think that there had to have been negotiations with the Imola promoters as to how they were going to manage that. I think
the Imola promoters told Formula One, look, it's not going to work. I mean, it was very late in the day, but then with weather, what do you do? I was halfway to Imola. I was driving there, and I was somewhere near Lyon in the middle of France. So I'd driven about 600 or 700 kilometers. And it's like, oh, okay, I've got to drive home again now. And so, I don't blame anybody for that. It's just life, So I drove 600, turned around, drove 600 home again, And I paid for all that. I paid for whatever I paid for. Just, it's part of the game. But that's a little bit different from warfare or political stuff. But we've had a few things straining us over time, and we just deal with it.
Dick, before I start to close this off, because I know we both have to get going, even though Joe is stuck at the airport for a few more hours.
Poor Joe. Yeah, he's fine.
For the audience, Joe lifted up a nice wine glass that I won't say whether it's full or not full. That will be a
I
mystery.
can tell you that it's entirely empty, and I need to fill it up again. But because I've got, I think it's 16 hours when I can go to sleep. So
There you go. You'll be fine.
I'll be fine. Exactly.
Dick, do you have anything else you'd like to add or ask?
No, I
Yes.
think that this has been a really interesting conversation to just listen into. And, it's very interesting to me because there are times when any organization, whether it's motorsport or some other business, you wind up with these force majeure scenarios, and you have no choice but to go and react in the very best way possible to protect your business, but also protect your your customers, whoever those customers might be. And Formula One's no different. And so you do have good business people running Liberty Media, and they're going to make sure that the best decision can be made. I have no doubt of that, because they're too big of a business to go and really screw it up. And so anyway, it'll be interesting to see what happens overall, whether we're in Bahrain or Jeddah, for in what, a month's time or thereabouts. So anyway, yeah, very interesting conversation.
I don't think that we can make any sensible assessment as to where those decisions will go, because we have no idea what the real world will do.
Yeah, we have not enough information.
We have to fit around the real world. So, because as I said at the very beginning, one must never forget that this is just the game that we're involved in, and it doesn't mean anything.
Right. No matter how important we might think it is.
Absolutely. We have
That's a
to
great
always
point.
bear that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I will say this has been a very enlightening conversation, and I look forward to the next one. Hopefully, Joe, that means you will have made it to Australia. Maybe it will be while you're there. If not, on your transit to the next place. Okay, friends, what did you think of this conversation? We'd love to hear from you. What questions are you wrestling with? What should we dive into next? Send them to Sabrina at 2guysaGirlandF1.com. We read every single one, and frankly, your questions are usually more interesting than what we'd come up with on our own. And with that, let me say, this ends our conversation. But we'll keep talking, and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.